Some characters in Overwatch are old, and that's not always a bad thing. When Space Ranger releases in August, OW's cast will have since doubled since that initial release in 2016. So I'm going to go through the characters with the least fundamental changes over the years since launch, and see if the old designs hold up, and if OW's initial designs still work. Spoiler alert, they kinda can, it just depends. So, with this video, I'm going to go ahead and swap it over. So basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to look at a couple different characters. I'll go by role, and these are going to be the ones that have pretty, like, not substantial changes over the years, that are pretty much the same. General idea how to play them. Obviously, every single character has had changes, but I'm looking at, like, on day one, does this character play basically the same as right now, right? There are a couple characters that are like this, and we'll go through. I'll talk about some of my omissions. Lucio, very close to launch, got all the changes that made him like he was today, but on launch, that's not what he was like. And he did play differently because of all the wall riding stuff, so he won't be here. Obviously, Mercy has been reworked a lot. Let me see, who else? Junkrat, he's gotten a lot of stuff. And more mines, and basically he can play much different than just sitting there and spamming. He actually has stuff to do, in theory. Obviously, Pharah just got a rework, so we're not going to include her. Symmetra was a different character, like in a different role at launch. Torb has gotten a rework. Diva basically got a rework within the first year of the game. Hog just got a rework. Basically anything like that, right? There are characters that have had abilities changed or had passive change or something, and I'll talk about those when we get there. But for the most part, these characters play typically the same. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with our first guy on the list. That's Reinhardt, right? Classic Reinhardt. Everybody loves Reinhardt, you know? He's got the pin, he's got the close range swings, and he's got his fire strikes. You know, they all do a little more damage nowadays. And of course, he's got the shield that he can walk and go with. They have since added and then removed his passive Ironclad. What was it, Ironclad? Steadfast. Steadfast with Reinhardt's. That made him not get knocked back as much. So basically, when has Rein ever worked in Overwatch 2? Not often, right? There was one season where they gave him a lot of armor, and he was really good. But then when they took that armor away, in fact, they just kind of reduced it a little bit. Again, he went right back to being kind of trash. He's mainly good on these, like, tighter, maybe a little, like, not super wide brawl maps. You know, he doesn't have much verticality. In fact, he doesn't have any. And he wants to be up close and personal. Thus, he wants to play tighter. The main problem, I think, with Reinhardt is that swing is pretty slow, and when you're swinging, you can't protect yourself. You only have armor to do that. Which, you know, if he doesn't have enough armor, he'll blow up. If he has too much armor, he's never going to die. It's such a weird push and pull trying to figure out how much armor Reinhardt should have. But yeah, Rein just does damage, and he can't do it very well. He can't get in to do it. Pin, this mobility pin, it's pretty good, but the only problem with that is that a lot of times Rein will, like, oh, I want to go contest, like, an angle or something, and now it's going to take a long time for him to get back to main or back to his team, because he, like, the big shield, like, this enables his team. You know, this is not really for Reinhardt so much as it is for everybody, and I think that's kind of the key problem. It's just Reinhardt has different modes, where he's in this mode, he's not really doing much, he's helping his team. In this mode, he's only helping himself, but also kind of blowing up. So, like, what do you do, right? You could give him a new passive or something like that, so that he's got, you know, some kind of, like, more bulk, more movement, anything. But I think what's the problem with Rein is that he's just not very versatile. It's hard to play him alone. It's hard to play him without very specific conditions. He requires a lot of resources. So he needs speed, and he needs a lot of healing, and that's healing that's not going to your other supports, and they have to be with Rein, and they can't really take angles so much. And I think that playstyle is starting to go away and away and away. And Rein has since been losing a lot of value. So in terms of new Overwatch, I think Rein can still work. He's gotten a lot of nice quality of life changes, but he needs just a little extra spice to be a little more versatile. You want to be able to play him in situations where all the stars don't have to align for him to be good. Winston. Winston is probably the tank from Overwatch 1 that has had the most consistent success. And arguably, he's the tank that has maybe the simplest kit in the game. He has a jump. He has bubble that he just places on the ground. Not to say he forgets about it, but he places it and then he just goes about his regular game plan. And he's got this really close range Tesla cannon that doesn't do like too much damage overall. So why can Winston compete very often when Reinhardt can't? In fact, he probably has less to his kit than Reinhardt does. Well, I just think that he has multiple abilities that are very versatile, right? Reinhardt doesn't really have that. Right, this ability right here, Bubble, is unironically one of the strongest abilities in the game. You can use this so many different ways. Aggression for Winston to play, helping block sightlines from other characters, helping your backline, enable your team, enable yourself, deny the enemy team. And you can do all of that at multiple times, and it's a lot about timing and placement and what you're doing, not just when you're doing it. And that's why Bubble, it's so fun to use, but also so versatile, so good. You can play Winston in hard dive comps, you can play him in slower ones, you can play him almost in a rush style. It's pretty good. The other really versatile thing about Winston is jump. And jump's on a really low cooldown, and what this enables him is for him to set up on high grounds before fights, and then pick, does he want to stay up here? Does he want to go do something else on the ground and then jump back up to safety, you know? And even with his just two abilities, they both have so much versatility and so much like, oh, he may not even have to bubble, right? And then he can save it and do it later. It's the synergy with Winston's kit is like really, really good. He's got one longer ability and one shorter ability, and they both have a really good power level. And that's why I think Winston is able to survive and exist in these metas with Orisa and Mauga. Even if it's not ideal, he can still be played on certain maps because he is so, like, there's so many ways to play him and so many ways to escape damage and get around, you know what I mean? It's very hard to master this character, but his abilities are really simple, you know? Pretty simple. And for Overwatch 2, or not even Overwatch 2, I think a lot of times his cooldowns and armor are what have kept Winston in the meta. You know, if Bubble is too long, then he's going to be a little hard to use, and if he doesn't have enough armor, then he's not actually going to be staying at Bubble. But he has more things. That's like 3 cooldowns, or 2 cooldowns and armor that you can change. With Reinhardt, if you change his numbers, sometimes it just like, he just becomes overbearing. You know, Winston doesn't really become overbearing unless he's paired with other characters that just like need Winston, right? So yeah, that's Winston. Also, bonus, Primal is a really good, fun ult, and these second chance, second life ultimates are very, very good. And that is just something that's still just having more health, more resources in a fight is always going to be valuable. Zarya. Zarya technically has gotten the bubble changes, but really Zarya's playstyle is pretty similar to what it used to be, right? She cannot engage until she has set up her bubbles, right? Unless she set up her charge. She can't just go in willy-nilly, get 80 charge, and then pop both of her bubbles instantly. She's gonna die. She's not actually gonna be able to do enough. So you have to set Zarya up. She's much more versatile now. You have more decision-making about, like, when do you bubble other people versus yourself, because it's not just one on one cooldown and one on the other. But the thing about Zarya, and I know I said Winston may be the simplest tank, I think it's Zarya now. Literally all it is that, you know, she either bubbles an ally or she bubbles herself, right? And like both of her abilities are different variations of bubble, right? So Zarya's place in the meta has really come down to her damage and, you know, how long and how often she can have bubbles. There's a little bit of like how strong the bubbles are and all that stuff, but Zarya is so simple that it's really hard, or it's really easy to overtune her without realizing it, just trying to make her compete. And I think a lot of the problem with Zarya is just that, again, like Reinhardt, she's incredibly immobile. More so than Reinhardt. I mean, like, she can rocket jump, which is nothing. And she is just this damage presence that you have to build up. And it's really easy to counter Zarya building charge. And it's decently easy to play around. And I think Zarya has only been good when her numbers have been really extreme, you know? She isn't really played when she's just okay. There are always better options. So for the tank role, I think a lot of what dictates the tanks is, does their damage too high? And do they consistently add value to the fight? You know what I mean? Winston is a lot of times doing something and setting up and staging, and that's like good for him. Reinhardt and Zarya can't do that as much, and it's hard for them to add value all the time, especially when it's like, oh, I have to focus on rotating, or I have to focus on bubbling my supports, and then I can't go in because I don't have my bubbles or stuff like that. So for the tanks, I think that's a big contentious point. You know, even if they upped Winston's damage by 5, he would probably be broken. He'd be doing like way too much damage. So that's really hard, you know, to fine tune the abilities. But when you have multiple different abilities that have more things to do and have different power and are much more different from each other, like Winston does, then I think it's much easier to find a good healthy middle ground about when, you know, he can be good all the time and not be overbearing. And of course, Winston's playmaking and positioning and all that game sense is where he really shines. And Brian does too, and Zarya does too. So let's go over to the damage roll. And I have Cass on here, and I understand that he has a new ability. But I would like to point out that flashbang, or the magnetic grenade, is effectively supposed to just be flash, but less frustrating. Which it doesn't feel like it most of the times. But it's not a stun anymore. It's just like a mobility stopper. And ideally, and now he can chuck it across the map, but originally it was like close range, and I don't think it really changes his play style that he can chuck it. But the difference with Cass now is that, you know, they've tried to add a little bit of like tankiness to him over the years. They've given him some health. They've given him roll damage mitigation. They've given him damage mitigation on his ult. And Cass is still like just now kind of being played a little more just because he has so much bulk and damage mitigation that he doesn't require as many resources as he once did. He still does because, you know, he doesn't have the mobility. But Cass has also just lost some synergy with his kit. He basically, this is not a factor in balancing Cass anymore. This is just here. You know what I mean? So basically, Cass has just lost one thing that used to make him good, and used to be something to play around. Now he has to have more of his power shifted into tankiness and not necessarily like his damage or his close range burst pressure. Is it better overall? Probably. Getting flat or like fan the hammer, flashbang, fan the hammer, and just like instantly exploding is really frustrating, and you can't get anywhere near this guy. So this is probably better overall in theory. But losing synergy, it means that you can't balance him around this anymore, and you have to find other places for the power to be. That could make him more frustrating, which I think he is more frustrating to play against, or at least it feels like it, because you just can't kill him very often, and he just stops your mobility for a couple seconds. And remember, stun was only like half a second, really. But yeah, I think he definitely needs a replacement for Nade. And I also think that, you know, roll, it's not a mobility tool, and it's got a little bit of like survivability, but really not that much. I think if there were some way to encourage Cass to hold on to bullets and not use roll, then it would make actually using that ability, you know, give it more decision making. Oh, do I want to try and catch them out and try and hit them with this bullet? Maybe he does more damage when he has less bullets in his clip, right? So then, like, rolling to reload at one bullet is losing out on a lot of damage. Something like that. I don't know. But basically, Cass, he shoots gun. At the end of the day, he shoots gun. And he's like mid-range, and he's not a sniper or anything. He's just shoots gun. And Cass is fun, and he's starting to find a place just because of his tankiness. But he's been outclassed, right? There's no reason to have a Cass when you have a Sojourn who does, Cass does consistent damage, but so does Soj, right? And Soldier gets more flanks and Cass doesn't. He has to be much closer. He requires more resources, right? Winston doesn't require too many resources. Ryan and Zar, they kind of do. Cass also requires resources, although he's, over the years, required less and less with all of that damage reduction. So, and of course, Deadeye, just a big space creator, ult, just kind of whatever. Genji. Genji is a character that has actually found success in Overwatch 2. And the difference between Genji and, I would say, most of the other characters on this list is that Genji is not simple, right? Genji is, he's got a lot going on. He's got the double jump. He's got dash resets. He's got survivability. He's got hypermobility. He's got wall climb, right? I think he's cybernetic agility is what his passive is called, right? So Genji has a lot going on. He has combos. He's got tech. He's very mobile. He's got 2 different rates of fire. He's got some spam. He's got close range, right? That's Genji. Genji has been usable because he doesn't require a lot of resources. He can hold space a lot by himself, and he can just sit up here and draw aggro and deflect and then run away. You know what I mean? Genji is able to do a lot more consistently nowadays since there's not one more tank. And I don't like Genji's design super much, but I think objectively, this is where original Overwatch, this is a character original Overwatch did really well with, at least in keeping him relevant nowadays. In Overwatch 1, he was mainly bad. It was really easy to deny him value, but Genji really does do a lot of things, and he does them consistently. So that's why Genji has found his place. You know what I mean? Where, Cass and Mei used to be kings in Overwatch 1, Genji has consistently found his way into metas and into different comps. They've also put a lot into his neutral. Blade just isn't as good anymore. Nano Blade isn't as good. So they've put a lot more into his neutral, which really helps his playstyle and gives him a place to be. But, the bones of Genji's design have been here since launch, and I think they've done a good job of keeping him relevant, and again, not too overpowered. Speaking of Mei is one of the only characters that has lost part of her kit. Now, she just does more damage and more slow when she used to do a whole freeze on left click. Now, freezing with left click, I think, was too much. But losing some depth to her kit has made Mei just really kind of boring. Like, this part of it was like freezing people and then shooting them. That felt good, and it felt like you were working towards something, and it gave you like, oh, should I try and do the DPS with the slow and try and get the freeze, or should I icicle them, right? And you still kind of have that. But since the slow does more damage and it is a slow, most of the time you should just shoot them. And I feel like she's lost a little bit of her depth. Now, Mei has still been very good in Overwatch 2 because of this. Because Ice Wall is extremely versatile, extremely good, denies tanks, denies angles, saves your team. It can do a lot of different things. And, also self-survivability as well. She doesn't have mobility as self-survivability, but she can heal herself. She doesn't require resources until she's used her abilities like that, and then she's going to need more help. So that's where Mei has been able to exist with these brawl comps. I would like to see more in her gameplay loop. She is pretty simple, but she has an ability that is much more complicated and complex than a lot of characters from Overwatch 1 had, even though it's, just creating a wall. Its application is significant, Okay. Arguably, this guy might be the most left behind character in the entire game. Reaper. Reaper has no versatility. Reaper cannot do anything unless he is right here, right close to you, right? Well, the idea behind Reaper, and I know that since launch, he used to have his old passive where he drops the orbs. his new passive effectively replaces that and just makes it more consistent. So I'm going to pretend like, I'm going to say Reaper plays the same way, basically. You're supposed to be able to get in, and if you get pressured, you get out with Wraith, right? And you can choose to stay in the fight and reload your guns or whatever, and that's a nice choice. But this, Reaper can't close the gap, right? Reaper is a close range character like Tracer, like Genji, but unlike them, he can't close the gap. This does not close the gap. When he gets here, everybody knows he's coming. It takes him a million years. By the time he gets there, they've all ran away, and then they pressure him out, and then he has to Wraith away, and that's it. Death Blossom is a really boring ult that he just comes out of nowhere and just tries to do a bunch of damage and assassinate people, and I think it's just, there's no decision making there. And I think Reaper he just doesn't do anything. You know, he's only good, he has been good occasionally in Overwatch 2, like 1 or 2 metas, because a tank was so overbearing or so picked all the time that, and one that he could like deny value of, Mauga, Winston, and pressure resources out of, that he was that effective. And his comp played so fast that he didn't worry about having to get in, right? He can, everybody else like dives in and he can like, what's it called? TP in with them, and now he's in the fight. That's it. He only works with those kind of comps consistently, right? And he's just not very good, and he can't do anything to any other character on the team, really. Just the tank, because it's so hard to pin people down with their mobility. Even characters like Cass and Mei, who have higher survivability and less mobility, I mean, like, Cass can roll away and nade him so that he is forced to Wraith, and now he's in a bad spot. Or Mei can just do a bunch of damage to him and then ice block and then get all her health back, and then Reaper's not going to have his health, and she can run away from the fight if she needs to. Like, Reaper just doesn't really win duels as much as he should. And he just doesn't have much to him. He just gets in and gets out, and he has trouble getting in the first place, so it forces him to get out early. He just doesn't have the mobility that he needs to in this day and age, right? Soldier is old as dirt, this character design. You know, coming out from just running around, and he has been good in Overwatch 2, especially initially. You know, it's hard to get him, but he's just been outclassed by Sojourn and Tracer and, you know, other characters that aren't as easy to pin down, because his movement, it's not burst movement, you know? He moves very consistently, very decently fast, but, you know, he's not going to be like TPing or sliding or anything like that. And that causes him to be forced away from his positions really early, because he has to leave earlier than everybody else. And that's where this ability doesn't work anymore. Because he wants to hold angles like this, but if people pressure him, he has to leave faster and lose the value of that pack. They did not really understand what Soldier would be doing when they designed this character, I think, and he still hasn't been able to, like, recover, and he still hasn't really been changed. I mean, this character is very similar to what he used to be, other than, like, recoil, or, like, spread, which he doesn't have anymore. He just has recoil. So, Soldier is still, like, viable, but he just doesn't have, you know, he's just been outclassed. You know what I mean? And he actually is outclassed by somebody who was here at launch, Tracer, who is another one of the characters who has barely changed at all, other than some numbers and some weird mechanic tweaks. Tracer is perfect. Tracer is the perfect design character in Overwatch. I mean, there's so much decision-making, so much risk involved in her. The movement is great. She's very versatile. She slots in anywhere. She does everything possible. But she's not overbearing when she does it, right? You have to be incredibly skilled to get value out of it. Nothing is very easy. You have to manage a lot. She, again, like Winston, she has one mobility cooldown that is very short and usable multiple times in a row. And then she has one very long cooldown that's more for sustain and trying not to use that at the wrong time. And you know, Genji is kind of the same way if he can set up his dashes properly, you know? Sojourn is kind of the same way with dash, right? It's mobility. I think a lot of what Overwatch characters are missing nowadays, since there's not another tank to protect you and the game plays faster is that the characters with less mobility and more sustain from, health and all of that, they're not as usable anymore. It's much harder. There are characters with sustain like Ori and Mauga. They have a little bit of mobility still. Mauga has a lot of mobility. Rom has mobility with his Nemesis form, right? Like, if we could add a little bit to that, to Zarya, to Reinhardt, to, I don't know, Cass, maybe his role goes a little farther. I feel like that could work at least decently well to keep those characters relevant. Now, they are frustrating and not really fun to play against sometimes. Some of those characters can be. But if we want them to be usable without completely redoing everything, keeping their original design in mind, we need to add a little extra flair to what they already have. And of course, the last character that is basically the same, Widowmaker. This is another character that just has an ability with zero synergy in her kit, really, anymore. Venomine is on an incredibly long cooldown, so is Grapple, which I think is important. And Venomine doesn't do much. You hit by the Venomine, you stay there for a couple seconds, and you wait before you go do what you were going to do anyways, She can see you, sure. And it's supposed to be a way for her to mark angles and make sure nobody's sneaking up on her. But there's so many ways to get around the map anymore that one Venomine doesn't do anything. And because it doesn't do anything, and because Grapple is on such a long cooldown, it's her only escape option, it's her only mobility, all of her power is in her gun. And the problem with that is that if it isn't in her gun, she's worthless because she's designed all around this one shot, because her abilities kind of suck. Grapple is good because, grapple shots are good because Widow can one-tap you when she's grappling, right? That's why Grapple has to be on a longer cooldown, or she'd be an airborne demon shooting everybody over the place. But if Grapple was on a lower cooldown and Widow had less damage and couldn't one-shot, she's not going to be able to do much. You know what I mean? She's not going to be able to do much consistently like she can now. And I think Widow is one of the longest, probably one of the worst fails as the game has gone on, that she just has not changed because her identity is so rooted in this one shot. And it's also really niche too. Like, she's not usable on most brawl maps. Certain dive maps she's not usable, but on other maps she's like almost a must pick. Like, there's no variety, right? Like, she's good on certain maps and that's it. And if you play her anywhere else, in coordinated team settings, she's just gonna hard lose and it's not gonna be able to do anything. So yeah, that's the DPS, right? DPS that are good and still consistent, they have consistent movement options, they have good damage, and they have good decision making. Even Soldier, who's still usable, and Mei, who are still usable, they're still missing one or two aspects that make them really interesting and really well designed. And then I only have one more support left, one more character left to support. It's Zen. Zen, of course, can't Discord multiple people in a row anymore, but Zen is the glass cannon who they keep removing and removing more of the glass, right?
Yep.
They're giving him survivability, but they can't give this character mobility or he would be really, really broken or fundamentally change. And I don't think Zen needs to super fundamentally change, but the fact that he's got this snap kick passive and everything, Zen is still niche. Even after all this, even though he's been better and usable in the past, he's still too niche. He can't work with dives very well anymore because it's so much easier to dive him. He can't, he works with spam. He can't really work with brawl at all because that's just not how he functions. He survives from the back and he gets flankers away from him. But what happens if an entire team runs at him, Zen is fun and the modes of fire are really fun. And I think that Discord, not being able to be reapplied after a couple seconds gives him a lot more decision making and alleviates some frustration that people have had with Zen in the past. But I think Zen is still kind of falling a little bit behind, and that's why he's not consistently used anymore. So basically, what's the point, right? Why am I bringing up all these old characters and all of this? Why have I not included some? Old Overwatch's designs are kind of all over the place. And there's good reason for that. Titan was the MMO that they were creating, and they kind of stitched together some characters to put in this game based off of other games and other ideas that they had, other classes from that game, and put them in the game and just kind of threw them to the wolves and were like, here, have fun. And that's why there was no real direction of where this game was going to go. So they have all these characters that are just wacky mismatches, put them all together, have them interact with each other. And that's what made Overwatch so interesting and engaging. And I don't want to completely get rid of the identity and uniqueness of a lot of these characters, but they just don't function with how Overwatch is played anymore, at least consistently and not being frustrating. You know, even like Genji, I find him frustrating sometimes. The way he's got this big burst damage that just feels like sometimes you just couldn't do anything about it. So I want to highlight the differences in survivability. You know, I highlighted Winston, Tracer, and Genji. Those are all survivable characters, but they do it through movement primarily. Genji's dashing away, Tracer is blinking all over, Winston is jumping out, right? They have other cooldowns that help them survive more, but it's more consistent to not take damage than it is for, you know, just to take damage and have a lot of bulk like Mei and Ryan and all of them. Because when those resources are gone, they're screwed, right? When Winston and Tracer and Genji all have the potential to have their uptime be way higher, while Zarya's uptime is not high. Mei's uptime is not potentially high. Cass's uptime is not high, at least in survivability concerns. So more consistent mobility is what keeps people in the game. And, you know, Venture is coming out, and I think they're perfect, right? A way to look at it. I think maybe Drill could be on a lower cooldown, and then that would, you know, have like the one defensive one and the one offensive movement one. But I think Venture is pretty good overall, right? Also, let's talk about win cons, which I didn't really talk about over all of this. You know, Winston, Tracer, Genji, they have a lot of different win cons, right? About where they want to do in the fight, how they want to hold angles, where they want to be pre-fight, mid-fight, post-fight, right? Zarya's win con is that she needs to build beam. She cannot engage until she builds beam, and then she can go do stuff. Is that good? Is that healthy? Should Zarya really not be able to do anything until, like, 10 seconds plus after the fight has started? To me, that seems a little ridiculous, you know? Reinhardt has to get in, but it's really hard for him to get in. He has to be super close to do a lot, to do much at all, right? Mei has to be able to set up a good wall and then get her team to engage off of it, which, you know, Mei's a little different. Soldier has to find a flank, and nobody can see him, and he needs to be safe to get out. Like, it's a lot of stuff that I think, you know, a Widow needs a really good sightline. She needs to get a charge up. You know, Reaper, oh my god, Reaper needs to somehow get in and get a lot of damage, kind of have the team unsuspecting. And it takes a lot of setup. And I think setup is not bad, but you're not doing much while you're setting up, and you're not providing a lot of value. And if a team like a, you know, Tracer, Genji, Lucio, Kiri, Winston is able to just run you down before you can get your setup, then you're just kind of worthless unless you have 400 damage per shot, and then you just melt them, and then like, there's nothing to it anymore, right? So I think characters need reasons to play, to be able to play them in multiple scenarios, you know, like different modes of fire, like longer range and shorter range, and different abilities that do different things and are versatile. I think versatility is really key to making sure a character doesn't fall behind. Like Mei isn't really falling behind, she's just like ebbs and flows of when she's good and when she isn't, because she has an ability that's really versatile. But Winston is much more consistent because he has multiple. Tracer has multiple. Genji has multiple, right? That's why those characters are much more consistent than the soldiers and the Meis, which are, you know, good sometimes, but not as good as the other ones, right? Also, I think I didn't talk about this too much either. Maps are a big thing. And I think a part of the versatility, characters need to be good on usable really on most maps. Obviously, there should be some like these maps are better and these maps are worse. But I think there's a lot of characters where it's like Widow, any brawl map, bad, terrible for her. You can't use her. That's so weird to me. Mei, you can't use her on a lot of dive maps. If she had a little bit more, maybe she would be a less, not as ideal pick, but she could still provide decent value, right? Reaper cannot work on long range maps at all. Like, he would be complete troll. And it's hard to use him on dive maps. And it's hard to use him on some brawl maps, right? There should be more maps where characters are usable and at least decent than there are maps where they are really bad. Again, Tracer has barely any bad maps in the game. Genji has a decent spread of maps. Winston has a really good spread of maps, right? Do you see where we're getting at? It's characters need to have a couple of different factors, to make them versatile, right? And Winston, he's not even like, Tracer and Genji, they're a little more complex, but Winston is simple. You can get this done with simple characters by giving them little tweaks over the years. That little right click that he has now, that's a great idea to give him a little bit more like, not range pressure, but range poke and more burst and all of that, which are good things to have, You can add more things to characters. You just have to make sure that you give them more knobs to balance out, right? The Overwatch team is always talking about knobs and like balancing. Like, we need to have different ways to balance the characters that we have. And I think that's really important. And that's why the characters that still work from Overwatch 1's initial design phase are like that, where they have a lot of different ways to change their power level, as opposed to very simple characters who don't have a lot to them, where you change one thing a little bit and it's all over. So I guess that brings me kind of to the end here. What's the point, right? Well, Overwatch 2 has been kind of stitched together, much like Overwatch 1 has. But I remember at the beginning of Overwatch 1, probably within the first year, so many characters, we'll say first 2 years, so many characters got changed. If we take a look at what characters on this roster got significant changes in that first year, D.Va did. She sucked at launch, right? We also had, like, I guess that's it for the tanks here. I don't even want to talk about Bastion. He was terrible for a while. Hanzo basically got a rework. Junkrat got like a soft rework. Reaper was changed, right? Reaper got some decent changes. Sombra got a rework after she launched, like really close. And she was a DLC character. Symmetra got like 17 different reworks over the years. Torb got a really big rework as well. I think for supports, there wasn't... Lucio got a rework. Mercy got a rework, right? That's so many characters just within the first year that they changed significantly to try to keep up with the pace of the game. And they have been doing that here a lot, too. We've had Ori, Doom, Roadhog, Ball's about to get a rework, Sombra, Brig, mini rework, stuff like that. But we need to think about when we make these reworks, how do we make them viable in the current game of Overwatch? What is valuable in Overwatch 2? I think Hog was, a pretty bad idea because it just made him Hog but a little more consistent, and that it makes him more frustrating. He's more survivable now, but he still doesn't do much, and he can be really overwhelmed easily, and his uptime is still, you can wait it out and get all those resources out without him being able to do much about it other than just completely back away way too early, And I think that's where the design trapping is, because you want to have characters that are unique and distinct, and maybe some characters that don't have much mobility, but the game is moving in that direction. So how do we balance, getting characters in a good spot to play the game properly while keeping the uniqueness? And that's a really tough challenge. And I don't blame the Overwatch team for not being able to answer all the time, and especially with all the resources it takes to help these characters get to where they need to be. I do think a lot of the reworks that they've done have been pretty positive. I like Doom. I like most of the Ori rework except for Fortify. I like playing Sombra now. Although playing against her is still not great. So there's ways to do this. And, Venture's a really good design. And the designs that they've come out with, save for like Lifeweaver, at least all those characters are usable, and they have been. You know, maybe Iliari is a little suspect on the usability front as well, but she was good for a little bit of time. But yeah, that's really all I've got. Um, if you want to see any extra ideas I've had for how to rework some of these problem characters, I actually have a series. It's called Unfixable on my YouTube channel. Basically, it's just I go through hypothetical reworks. Like if I were to rework a character, how would I do it? And I think it has some really interesting ideas. Some are better than others in my opinion, but that's kind of what I want. I want discussion. I want to figure out, like, I just want to spitball ideas about how do we get people up to speed? How do we alleviate some of the frustrations some of these characters have had? If that sounds cool to you, please go ahead and check that out. If not, you can check out any of my other socials, do all that good YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I really do appreciate it. It helps out a lot. I've been doing a couple videos a week, so if you do like this stuff, 2 or 3 videos will come out a week. One in the Unfixable series for a little bit of time, and hopefully in the future some completely new hero designs from the ground up I would like to do, but those take a little bit more time and thought process behind them. So if you made it this far, thank you so much. Have a good day. I will see you later.